Ah, 2022. Just as fast as you came, you're now suddenly gone. Honestly, reflecting back, it's actually been a decent year for games, although maybe not quite the banger we were originally expecting. Still, I had a lot of fun this year, and I really hope you did too. As I look back to create this year's year-end video, I realized something. Ever since I started giving out scores regularly, I pretty much have only ever given out 3s and 3.5s. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, it seems like the only games I talk about are games that I actually enjoyed. So, this year, in addition to my top 5 games list, I also wanted to highlight some of the games that I played this year that I didn't get to make videos about and I'm not really sure I'll do full reviews for. Just a disclaimer, these are games I tried for the first time this year, but for one reason or another, didn't play enough for me to do a full review. These really are just my quick impressions, with some of these thoughts being based on like 2 hours of gameplay, so really, don't take these too seriously. Let's get started. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, not to be confused with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, is the sequel to the reboot of the classic FPS franchise. Essentially, this game is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and if you understood all of that, you might want to consider getting some sun. And yeah, I mean, it's COD. It's filling a hole in the AAA scene right now and is doing a pretty solid job, but I still feel like it feels more or less like the same game to me personally. In the future, I might make a video on aim assist focusing on this game, but don't get your hopes up. For the sake of this video, I'm giving it a 3 out of 4. Elden Ring, the open world Souls game. For many gamers, Elden Ring was probably game of the year. While I can recognize all the artistry that went into it, I think it just wasn't the right game for me this year. For one thing, it just wasn't the relaxing experience I felt like I needed this year. I also think the open world was just difficult for my first Souls experience, and so I'm going to be trying out Sekiro first. I'll give the game a 3.5 though, and plan on returning to it before I die. Hopefully. And then of course we have Destiny 2, the long-running looter shooter. While I didn't hate it, I would also say it's not really a game for me. I just feel like I got the gist of the game after a couple of quests and wasn't that into the whole structure and grind. And also, I felt like some of the enemies were just bullet sponges and whatnot. I also didn't love the overly long new player experience. Honestly, I'd say it's tough to get into if you're new, but some people will absolutely love this game. I'll give it a 2.5. Divinity Original Sin 2 is like a video game D&D adventure with nearly endless possibilities. Every time you reload this game, you can cause a completely different chain of events to happen just by changing a couple of different responses. It also supports up to 4-player multiplayer, so if you have someone you want to introduce to tabletop gaming, or vice versa, this would actually be the perfect game to facilitate that. It gets a 3.5 from me personally, but I think this will actually be a 4 for a lot of people. And next, we have Rust, the popular online survival crafting game. I finally gave Rust a try this year and I actually really enjoyed it. I guess running around naked with rocks is just something that speaks to me at a really deep level. The main issue in my mind is that at this point, it's not really super noob friendly and having to grind back up after dying can be really tough for a new player. Still, I enjoyed the overall experience and I'll give it a 3. Staying in the same vein, we have The Forest, another co-op survival game. However here, it's maybe a bit more focused on the story and the world than Rust was. I had some pretty genuine scares while running into natives for the first time, but otherwise, I think the game's alright. There's still a lot to uncover, I'm sure, but for now, I'll give it a 2.75. Okay, next we have PGA Tour. Personally, I play 2K21, and while I know it's not the most up-to-date game in the series, and sports games in general kinda suck nowadays, but I just want to give this game a shout out. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's probably my favorite golf game I've ever played. I really love the stick-based control scheme and how it makes you feel like you're really playing golf. I'll give it a 3.5. Then we have Hunt Showdown, a Tarkov-style game where you play as a group of witch hunters. It's definitely an interesting concept, and while I didn't love how the camera controlled, I liked the game overall. My friends, though, weren't as big of fans, so we didn't really stick with it. It doesn't really feel fair to give this a score after like 3 missions, but you know, for now, I'll give it a 2.75. Alright, so now we have Darkest Dungeon 2, the sequel to the dark RPG roguelike, which is still in early access. To be honest though, I'm not really sure how I feel about it. It still feels very much like the first game as you lead a party through a deadly path and pray none of them go insane. It has this new wagon-based interface that lets you choose your path, but I don't know. I guess this modern, streamlined roguelike approach maybe just wasn't what I was expecting. Again, limited playtime here so far, so maybe there's a lot more later on, but I'll give this a weary 2.75. Of course, this year was the World Cup, and so this year I played Football Manager. Football Manager is basically a glorified spreadsheet, and I fucking love it. I'm planning on making a video about sports simulations in the future, but again, don't get your hopes up. This gets a 3.5 from me, maybe even a 4 to be honest. Alright, what's next? Oh yeah, Nerds Online. This is multiplayer solitaire. It can be chaotic and fun, but I don't know. Unless you and your friends are into solitaire, I don't think this will keep you interested for more than a couple of rounds. I'll give it a 2. Super Animal Royale is a cute 2D animal BR game, and I don't know. I think battle royales just aren't my thing anymore. Honestly, it's pretty good for what it is, but it will feel a bit like you're playing a Flash game. I'll give it a 2. Golf with Your Friends is a janky mini golf game that can definitely be fun with friends. However, I'm pretty sure someone will eventually get frustrated and rage quit. So while I think the game is far from perfect, I think at the very least, you'll be amused. I'll give it a 2.5 and recommend waiting for it to be cheaper. Barotrauma is a game where you and friends manage a submarine and try to survive in a space ocean. I think this was our own fault for not really playing tutorials, but we ended up refunding this game. It really doesn't feel right giving this a score because I'm sure it's great, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna give it a 2. Inside the Backrooms is a horror game where you try and make your way through what is essentially a labyrinth and avoid an assortment of monsters. It's a bit jank, but I think it's actually good for some genuine thrills and chills. I'll give it a 3. Keeping with scary hours, we have Devour, a horror game that is essentially a scavenger hunt combined with tag. It can definitely be scary at first, but I did feel like once you experienced it once, you kinda got the point of the game. It's actually okay for the price, but I'd personally give it a 2. And finally, we have StarCraft 2 Battle Poker. So this last one is just a shout out to an arcade game and community in StarCraft 2. Battle Poker is StarCraft 2 units meet poker mechanics and an auto battler all in one. While I do dislike how much luck can be involved sometimes, I just wanted to highlight this as a game that helped me get through this year. If anyone has any recommendations of more passive games that can be played while chatting with friends, such as this or Hearthstone Battlegrounds, definitely let me know. I'll give it a 2.5. And hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video, consider maybe clicking some of those buttons and helping a brother out. But alright, without further ado, let's get to what we're actually here for. My top 5 games of 2022. And sorry, another quick preface, these are the 5 games I like the most that I tried for the first time this year, not necessarily games that were released this year. Sorry, there's just way too much great stuff to play nowadays, and the backlog just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Let's go! Number 5. Overwatch 2. I don't know if this is going to be a controversial pick or not, since it's questionable if this game is even technically a 2, but I actually still really enjoy Overwatch 2. The team-based shooter made a big comeback this year with a change to 5v5 gameplay, significantly changing the pace of the game. Maybe some of it's just nostalgia, but I do genuinely think the game is in a better place than it has been for a long time. I know a lot of fans and creators have been putting out even more negative videos since I put mine out, but even still, I do manage to find a lot of fun in it. It's not some revolutionary game anymore, and I'm not even sure if I want to get the PvP when it does come out, but I'd be lying if I said Overwatch 2 wasn't some of the most fun I had in 2022. Number 4. Multiverses. Warner Bros.' entry into the platform fighting genre was better than I'd ever expected it to be. I just think it's really well done. It has all the polish and heart you'd expect in a game that has so many great universes to pull from, and now I finally get to live out my dream of seeing Harley Quinn and Bugs Bunny going at it. While it is a bit more slow-paced than some games and has some mechanics I don't love, it does really well with its focus on 2v2 gameplay, which I think is good for a genre that is very much dominated by a 1v1 culture. Hopefully they continue on strong, and I can't wait to see what wacky characters they release in the future. Number 3. Against the Storm. Against the Storm was a surprise for me. It was nowhere on my radar, but quickly became one of the games I actually found myself enjoying and coming back to this year. Against the Storm is a city building game that adds in roguelike elements, forcing you to adapt to difficult situations as you race against the clock. While I do think it has a lot of room for growth, it really was just a unique take on a game genre that I played quite a bit of these last few years. As a result, it definitely stood out to me as it took a lot from games before it and even throws in its own unique twists. Number 2. V-Rising. V-Rising is like Diablo meets Rust, but with vampires. While in hindsight, I do think the whole staying out of the sun thing wasn't necessarily the most fun mechanic, I still think V-Rising did a great job of making this world of vampires come to life. The world is pretty big and diverse, and the bosses are really intense and actually pretty challenging. The whole PvPvE aspect definitely gave it a unique feel that I haven't really seen in other action RPGs. The only thing at this point I think is that I played the game when it was at its biggest hype, and so I'm not so sure how active it is anymore. I'm sure once they release more content, I and many others will revisit the game, but until then, it may just have to lie in the crypt, dormant until then. And alright, I'm just gonna throw a couple of quick shoutouts to some games that stood out to me, but didn't quite crack the list this year. First, we have Chivalry 2, a medieval combat simulator. It's just dumb fun, yet surprisingly skill-based. Next, we have Mini Motorways, a great, relaxing puzzle and traffic simulation game. It's a bit more puzzle than traffic, but is definitely enjoyable and perfect for relaxing. And then of course we have Project Zomboid. This is The Sims meets zombie survival in this hyper-realistic, maybe too realistic, survival game. And now finally, we've reached number 1.
Ba 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 ba.
And now, presenting Your Majesty King James the First of his name. Thank you, Dildo. But I told you, you don't need to yell directly into my ear. I'm right here.
Pardon me, lord. I have myself a condition. Also, it's pronounced dee-doo.
Ah, I see. Thank you, Dildo. Guards.
NANI?!
So yeah, my top game of the year is actually a game that didn't even come out this year, but I really first got into it because of the Humble Bundle that came out this year. Crusader Kings 3 is the grand strategy game that lets you go medieval on your enemies as you marry, scheme, and war your way to the top. I just think it's so much fun as you create your dynasty stories, and I can truly feel like anything can happen. And look, I know some players are going to say how this game is too simplistic, but I think it's a great way to get comfortable with the grand strategy genre as a whole. I'll never forget the first time I tried to play CK2 back in the day, and I was struggling to even understand the whole barony, county, duchy structure, let alone all the other mechanics. Maybe I'm just older and wiser now, but CK3's learning curve was not nearly as bad. So sure, it's not the perfect game, but I just think it's so well done and is one of the few games I played this year that really left an impression on me. I'll never forget the first time me and my 2 kids were murdered in quick succession by my conniving sister, and then I was forced to play as her and her children. Or the time I went crazy and forced everyone in court to go around.
In the nude?
I just love the freedom the game gives you, and I love the twists and turns the whole time. I really hope future expansions can beef up the game a bit, and at the very least, it's become a sort of gateway drug for me to explore more grand strategy games in the future. But yeah, that was my 2022. I want to hear from you though. What were your favorite games you played last year? Did you share any that I played or feel differently than me about any games? I'd love to hear from you, get some conversation going, and maybe even add some games to my wish list. And of course, if you made it this far, I just want to say I appreciate you and hope you're doing well. I truly appreciate everyone who has supported me on this journey. You know who you are. It's been all over the place, but a lot of fun regardless. I love you all, hope you had a great holidays, and a happy new year.